Tonight we travel back to a time before cities. A time before roads, markets, temples, governments, or towering buildings. A time when the world was vast, wild, and largely untouched by human construction. For most of human history, people did not live in cities at all. Our ancestors spent tens of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers, moving across landscapes in small groups. They followed migrating animals, searched for seasonal plants, and adapted to whatever nature provided. Home was not a permanent place. It was wherever food, water, and shelter could be found. Life was often unpredictable. A successful hunt could provide food for days, while a failed one could bring hunger and uncertainty. Families traveled together, carrying only what they needed. The rhythms of life were dictated by the seasons, the weather, and the movements of the natural world. Yet somewhere around 10,000 years ago, something remarkable began to happen. In several regions of the world, humans started experimenting with a completely new way of life. Instead of constantly moving, they began staying in one place. Instead of gathering wild plants, they learned to cultivate them. Instead of following herds, they started raising animals. These changes may seem simple today, but they would transform human history forever. As food supplies became more reliable, populations slowly grew. Villages became larger. Houses stood side by side. Communities expanded beyond anything humanity had previously experienced. For the first time, large numbers of people began living together in permanent settlements. This raises one of the most fascinating questions in history. How did humans make the leap from small wandering bands to crowded communities filled with hundreds, or even thousands, of people? What was daily life actually like in one of the world's earliest urban settlements? What did people eat? How did they build their homes? How did they work, worship, raise families, and survive? Tonight, we will explore one of humanity's earliest and most extraordinary settlements, the ancient community known as Catalhoyuk. Located in what is now modern-day Turkey, Catalhoyuk existed thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt, before Stonehenge, and long before the rise of the great civilizations of Mesopotamia. Its people were pioneers. They were among the first humans to experiment with a way of life that would eventually lead to every city on Earth today. As we journey through their world, imagine the glow of hearth fires inside mud-brick homes, the sounds of families gathered together beneath starlit skies, and the quiet beginnings of civilization itself. This is the story of how humanity learned to live together. And it all began long before cities as we know them existed. Before cities existed, humanity lived a very different life. Long before the first cities appeared, humanity lived in a very different world. There were no streets, no houses built to last for generations, and no permanent settlements filled with hundreds or thousands of people. For most of human history, people lived as hunter-gatherers. This way of life had existed for tens of thousands of years and shaped nearly every aspect of human survival. Small groups of families moved across the landscape together, searching for food and following the rhythms of nature. A typical group might consist of only a few dozen individuals. Everyone knew one another. They traveled together, hunted together, and shared the challenges of daily life. Their survival depended on cooperation and an intimate knowledge of the natural world. Animals were one of their most important sources of food. Large herds of deer, wild cattle, gazelles, and other animals often migrated with the changing seasons. Human groups learned to follow these movements, tracking opportunities wherever they appeared. Plants were equally important. Wild fruits, nuts, roots, seeds, and edible grasses provided valuable nutrition throughout the year. Different foods became available during different seasons, requiring constant adaptation. Because resources changed from place to place, people rarely stayed in one location for very long. Life was defined by movement. When food became scarce, families packed their belongings and moved on. When seasons changed, entire groups followed familiar routes that had been used for generations. Their homes were temporary. Some camps consisted of simple shelters made from branches, animal hides, and natural materials. Others may have used caves or rock overhangs for protection. Nothing was designed to be permanent. The world itself was their home. This lifestyle offered freedom, but it also came with many challenges. Weather could quickly become a threat. A sudden storm might destroy a temporary shelter. A harsh winter could reduce food supplies. Extended droughts could force groups to travel much farther than usual. Predators were another constant concern. Lions, wolves, bears, and other dangerous animals shared the same landscapes as humans. At night, the sounds of the wilderness reminded people that they were not the only hunters in the world. Food shortages could be even more dangerous. A successful hunt might provide enough food for several days. A failed hunt could mean hunger. Sometimes groups had to survive on whatever plants and small animals they could find until conditions improved. Despite these difficulties, early humans possessed one remarkable advantage. They worked together. Families formed the foundation of society. Parents cared for children. Grandparents shared knowledge and experience. Everyone contributed according to their abilities. Food was often shared among members of the group. Skills were passed from one generation to the next. Cooperation allowed humans to survive challenges that would have been impossible to face alone. Over time, these social bonds became increasingly important. Human populations slowly grew. New technologies improved hunting and food gathering. Knowledge accumulated across generations. As groups became larger, opportunities began to emerge that had never existed before. People started experimenting with new ways of obtaining food. Instead of simply collecting wild plants, they began encouraging certain plants to grow. Instead of only hunting animals, they started managing and eventually domesticating some species. At first, these changes were small, perhaps barely noticeable, but they would eventually transform human history forever. The age of wandering hunter-gatherers was about to meet a revolutionary new idea. An idea that would lead to villages, towns, and eventually the first cities. Then agriculture began changing everything. For countless generations, humans had lived as hunter-gatherers. They moved with the seasons, followed animal migrations, and relied on the natural world to provide food. It was a way of life that had served humanity for thousands of years. But around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary began to happen. In several regions of the world, people started experimenting with a completely new relationship with nature. Instead of simply collecting wild plants, they began trying to grow them. At first, the change was gradual. No one woke up one morning and decided to invent farming. Rather, it developed through observation and experience accumulated over many generations. People noticed that seeds dropped near campsites sometimes sprouted into new plants. They learned that certain areas produced better harvests than others. Slowly, they began encouraging useful plants to grow where they wanted them. These early experiments marked the beginning of agriculture. What started as a simple effort to increase food supplies would eventually transform the course of human history. One of the most important regions in this story was an area known today as the Fertile Crescent. Stretching across parts of the modern Middle East, this region contained some of the most productive landscapes in the ancient world. Its rivers provided water. Its soils were rich and fertile. Its climate supported a variety of wild plants that could be cultivated by early farmers. For communities living there, the environment offered opportunities unlike those found in many other regions. The Fertile Crescent became one of humanity's great laboratories of innovation. Here, people began learning how to manage the natural world rather than simply adapting to it. Among the first crops to be cultivated were wild ancestors of wheat and barley. These grains proved especially valuable. They could be harvested in large quantities, stored for long periods, and transported relatively easily. Unlike many wild foods that spoiled quickly, grains provided a dependable source of nourishment. Year after year, farmers selected the best plants for cultivation. Over time, the crops themselves began to change. Human choices gradually shaped the evolution of wheat and barley, making them better suited to agriculture. This process is known as domestication. It transformed wild plants into crops capable of supporting growing populations. As farming improved, communities experienced something that had previously been rare: food surpluses. For the first time, people could sometimes produce more food than they immediately needed. This surplus changed everything. Extra food could be stored for future use. It provided protection against poor harvests and seasonal shortages. It allowed populations to grow because more people could be fed. A community that once struggled simply to survive could now begin thinking about the future. Perhaps the most revolutionary consequence of farming was that people no longer needed to move constantly. Fields required attention throughout the year. Crops had to be planted, protected, harvested, and stored. Remaining close to farmland became increasingly important. Gradually, temporary camps gave way to permanent homes. Families began building structures designed to last. Villages emerged where people could live year-round. Generations grew up in the same location. A completely new way of life was taking shape. The rhythms of hunting and migration were being replaced by the rhythms of planting and harvest. Humanity was becoming more settled, more organized, and more connected to specific places than ever before. The agricultural revolution did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly across centuries. Yet its impact was immense. It laid the foundation for population growth, social complexity, trade, and eventually civilization itself. The world of wandering hunter-gatherers was beginning to fade. And in its place, something larger was emerging. Small villages slowly grew larger. As farming spread and villages became larger, humanity moved closer to a new and extraordinary chapter in its history. For thousands of years, people had lived in small communities. Even the largest settlements were modest compared to what would come next. Then, around 9,000 years ago, in the plains of ancient Anatolia, part of modern-day Turkey, one of humanity's most remarkable experiments began. Its name today is Catalhoyuk. To modern eyes, it may not look like a city in the traditional sense. There were no grand palaces, no paved roads and no towering monuments. Yet for its time, Catalhoyuk was revolutionary. It was one of the largest and most densely populated settlements the world had ever seen. Long before the pyramids of Egypt rose above the desert sands, long before the great cities of Mesopotamia appeared, thousands of people were already living together at Çatalhöyük. Archaeologists estimate that at its peak, the settlement may have housed between 5,000 and 8,000 people. For the Neolithic world, this was extraordinary. The community occupied a fertile region surrounded by rich agricultural land. Nearby rivers and plains provided resources that supported farming, herding, and daily life. Its location was ideal. Fields supplied grain. Pastures supported animals. Trade routes connected the settlement with neighboring regions. Over time, people continued arriving, attracted by opportunity and stability. But why did so many people choose to live together in one place? Part of the answer was farming. Agriculture provided a reliable food supply that could support larger populations than hunting and gathering alone. Fields of wheat and barley helped feed growing numbers of families. Domesticated sheep and goats provided meat, milk, and other resources. Food created security. And security encouraged settlement. Trade also played an important role. Catalhoyuk was connected to wider networks of exchange. One particularly valuable resource was obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for making sharp tools and weapons. The region surrounding the settlement contained important obsidian sources. Traders traveled considerable distances to obtain it. As goods moved between communities, so did ideas, skills, and knowledge. The settlement became more than just a farming village. It became a center of interaction. Community itself may have been another powerful attraction. Living near other families offered advantages. People could share labor, exchange goods, cooperate during difficult times, and participate in social and religious activities. A larger population created opportunities that smaller groups could not easily provide. Generation after generation, the settlement continued growing. As more people arrived, homes were built close together. Space became increasingly valuable. Unlike modern cities with broad streets and separate neighborhoods, Catalhoyuk developed in a remarkably compact way. Houses stood side by side with almost no gaps between them. From above, the settlement may have appeared as a continuous cluster of connected buildings stretching across the landscape. This density marked one of the earliest examples of urban living. People were learning how to exist together in numbers never before experienced in human history. Shared spaces became important. Communities developed ways to organize daily life, distribute resources, and maintain social relationships within an increasingly crowded environment. Challenges undoubtedly arose. Living among thousands of neighbors required new forms of cooperation and adaptation. Yet the experiment continued. For centuries, Catalhoyuk thrived. Its residents were participating in something entirely new. Without realizing it, they were helping create the foundations of urban civilization. Their settlement represented a turning point in human history. The world was changing from one dominated by scattered villages into one increasingly shaped by larger and more complex communities. The first city was not merely a collection of houses. It was a new way of organizing human life. A revolutionary experiment in living together. And the experience of daily life inside those crowded mud brick homes would have been unlike anything humanity had known before. Life inside the city was unlike anything humans had experienced before. To a visitor from the modern world, Catalhoyuk would have looked both familiar and completely strange. It was a city filled with homes, families, and daily activity. Yet almost everything about its design differed from the cities we know today. Perhaps the most surprising feature was the absence of streets. There were no roads running between houses. No narrow alleys winding through neighborhoods. No public pathways connecting one section of the settlement to another. Instead, the homes were built directly beside one another, packed together so tightly that their walls touched. From above, the settlement resembled a vast honeycomb made of mud bricks. Thousands of people lived within this dense cluster of buildings. The rooftops formed an almost continuous surface stretching across much of the city. Because there were no streets at ground level, the rooftops became the city's primary transportation system. People walked across the roofs to move from one area to another. A journey across town often meant stepping from rooftop to rooftop rather than following a road. Imagine standing atop a mud brick home on a bright morning. Around you, neighbors are beginning their day. Smoke rises from hearth fires through roof openings. Children play nearby. Families carry baskets of grain and supplies across the rooftops. The roofs function almost like modern streets, connecting the community above the buildings. This unusual arrangement may have offered several advantages. Dense construction helped conserve space. It may also have provided protection from wild animals and other dangers outside the settlement. The tightly connected structures created a strong and unified community landscape. Another remarkable feature was the way people entered their homes. Most houses did not have doors at ground level. Instead, entry was made through an opening in the roof. A wooden ladder connected the rooftop to the interior below. To enter a house, a person climbed down through the roof opening. To leave, they climbed back up. This design likely served several practical purposes. Roof openings provided ventilation, allowing smoke from cooking fires to escape. They also limited direct access from outside, potentially increasing security and reducing unwanted visitors. For modern observers, it remains one of the most distinctive characteristics of life at Catalhoyuk. The homes themselves were constructed primarily from mud bricks. These bricks were made by mixing earth, water, and organic materials before shaping and drying them in the sun. Mud brick was widely available and provided effective insulation against both heat and cold. Timber was also used where available. Wooden beams helped support roofs and strengthen structures. Despite their simple appearance, these homes were carefully built and regularly maintained. Families often repaired walls, replastered surfaces, and rebuilt sections when necessary. Many houses remained in use for generations. Inside, the homes were organized around daily life. The main living area served multiple functions. People cooked, ate, worked, rested, and socialized within the same general space. Raised platforms along the walls may have been used for sitting, sleeping, and other household activities. Storage areas were essential. Food had to be protected from moisture, pests, and spoilage. Grain, tools, and household goods were carefully stored inside the home. Every available space was valuable. Some rooms contained ovens and hearths for cooking. Others were dedicated to storage or specialized activities. The home was far more than a shelter. It was the center of family life. Daily movement throughout the settlement reflected its unique design. People climbed ladders, crossed rooftops, visited neighbors, transported supplies, and carried out countless routines that kept the community functioning. From sunrise to sunset, life unfolded above and within the mud brick structures. The city was alive with activity. Yet beneath the routines of construction, movement, and work lay something even more important: the family. For the people of Çatalhöyük, everyday life revolved around the household. Work, cooperation, and survival all began at home. Everyday life revolved around family and survival. In the early city of Catalhoyuk, life was not organized around individual homes in the modern sense, but around extended families and close-knit household groups. A single household often included parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes other relatives living together under one roof. These families formed the foundation of society. They shared responsibilities, resources, and daily survival tasks in ways that were essential for life in an early urban environment. Everyday life revolved around simple but constant work. Cooking was a daily necessity. Food had to be prepared using basic tools and open hearths, often inside the home itself. Grain was ground into flour, dough was prepared by hand, and meals were cooked over controlled fires. Childcare was a shared responsibility. Children were raised not only by parents but by the wider household community. Older siblings, grandparents, and other relatives all played a role in caring for the young. This collective approach helped ensure that children were protected and taught the skills they would need to survive. Food preparation was another central activity. Harvested grains needed to be cleaned, stored, and processed before they could be eaten. Animal products like milk or meat also required careful handling. Much of daily life was dedicated to ensuring that food supplies remained stable throughout the year. Sleeping arrangements were simple but practical. Families often slept within the same shared living space, using raised platforms or designated areas inside the home. Privacy, as it is known today, did not exist in the same way. Instead, life was communal and closely connected. Raising children in such an environment meant constant interaction with others. Children learned by observing adults and participating in daily tasks from an early age. Skills such as food preparation, tool use, and social cooperation were passed down naturally within the household. Elders were highly valued. Older members of the family carried knowledge and experience that helped guide survival decisions. They contributed wisdom about farming, weather patterns, and social traditions. Caring for elders was seen as a responsibility shared by the entire household. Beyond the household itself, community relationships played a vital role in daily life. Families were closely linked to their neighbors, often working together in shared activities. Although homes were physically separate units, life was deeply interconnected. People exchanged goods, helped one another during difficult times, and participated in broader social and cultural practices. In a city where thousands of people lived closely together, cooperation was not optional, it was essential. Social bonds helped maintain stability and reduced conflict in a dense living environment. Even without formal institutions as we know them today, early urban society depended on trust, collaboration, and shared responsibility. As the city grew, the demands of survival increased. Feeding thousands of people required constant effort and coordination. Agriculture, storage, and food production became central to the functioning of the entire community. And this growing need for food would shape nearly every aspect of life in the city. As the population of the early city expanded, one challenge became more important than any other: food. Feeding thousands of people required careful planning, cooperation, and constant labor. The foundation of survival was agriculture. People cultivated crops such as wheat and barley in fields surrounding the settlement. These crops provided a stable and reliable source of nutrition compared to wild food gathering. Farming followed the rhythm of the seasons. During planting season, seeds were carefully sown into prepared soil. As crops grew, fields were tended and protected from animals and environmental threats. Harvest season was one of the most important times of the year. Entire communities worked together to gather mature crops. Golden fields of grain were cut using stone tools, collected in baskets, and transported back to the settlement. The success of the harvest determined the stability of the entire year ahead. In addition to crops, animals played a crucial role in survival. Sheep and goats were among the first domesticated animals in the region. They provided meat, milk, wool, and other valuable resources. Herding animals required careful management, but it also provided a more predictable food supply than hunting wild species. Food storage became essential in an agricultural society. Surplus grain was stored in clay containers, storage pits, or designated areas within homes. Proper storage ensured that food could be preserved for months, helping communities survive during poor harvests or harsh seasons. Preparing meals was a daily activity that transformed raw ingredients into edible food. Grains were ground into flour using stone tools. Bread-like foods were likely baked on simple hearths or heated surfaces. Animal products were processed and shared among household members. Managing shortages was an ongoing concern. Even with farming, nature remained unpredictable. Droughts, pests, or poor weather could reduce harvest yields. Communities had to carefully ration supplies and rely on stored reserves during difficult periods. This made cooperation even more important. No single household could survive alone for long. The entire community depended on shared effort, communication, and mutual support. The importance of cooperation extended beyond farming. It shaped social life, trade, and daily survival strategies. People worked together not only because it was efficient, but because it was necessary for survival in a densely populated early city. Not everyone, however, spent their days farming. As the city grew more complex, new roles and skills began to emerge. Some people focused on craft production. Others specialized in trade, tool-making, or construction. A new form of organized society was beginning to take shape. Not everyone spent their days farming. As the first cities grew larger, a new kind of society began to emerge. Not everyone spent their days farming or gathering food anymore. For the first time in human history, people began to specialize in different types of work. This shift marked an important turning point in the development of civilization. In early settlements like Catalhoyuk, skilled individuals started focusing on specific crafts that supported the entire community. Some became early craftsmen. They shaped clay, carved stone, and created useful objects for daily life. One of the most important crafts was pottery production. Clay was gathered from nearby riverbanks and carefully shaped into containers. These pots were then dried and hardened, sometimes in simple kilns or open fires. Pottery became essential for storing grain, water, and cooked food. It helped communities preserve their resources more effectively. Tool making was another crucial skill. Stone tools were carefully chipped and shaped to create sharp edges. These tools were used for farming, hunting, and construction. A skilled toolmaker was highly valuable in early society. Textile creation also began to develop during this period. People learned how to process plant fibers and animal wool into threads. These threads were woven into simple fabrics that could be used for clothing, coverings, and storage materials. As clothing became more common, it provided protection and comfort in different climates. Trade skills also began to appear. Not everyone produced everything they needed. Instead, people exchanged goods and services with others. This exchange required trust, cooperation, and basic forms of economic organization. Over time, a division of labor emerged. Different individuals and households focused on different tasks based on skill, knowledge, or need. Some specialized in farming. Others focused on crafting tools or making pottery. Some worked in textile production. Others helped with construction or trade. This division made communities more efficient and productive. It also created early forms of economic complexity. Goods were no longer simply shared within small family groups. They began circulating within larger networks of exchange inside the settlement. Skills and knowledge became increasingly important forms of value. The more specialized a person became, the more essential they were to the community. This growing complexity laid the foundation for future economic systems. As settlements became more interconnected, trade expanded beyond local boundaries. Goods began traveling from one community to another. Ideas and technology spread along these same routes. This marked the beginning of a wider interconnected world. Trade connected the city to distant regions. As early cities like Catalhoyuk continued to grow, they became more than just centers of farming and daily survival. They evolved into hubs of exchange where goods, materials, and ideas moved between communities. Trade became one of the most important forces shaping early civilization. One of the key elements of this system was the creation of exchange networks. These networks connected different settlements across large distances. People traveled from village to village, carrying goods that were rare, useful, or highly valued. Among the most important traded materials was obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass that can be shaped into extremely sharp tools. It was highly prized in the ancient world for cutting, hunting, and crafting. Regions near volcanic areas had access to this valuable resource, making them important centers of trade. Traders would travel long distances to obtain obsidian and then distribute it across different communities. This created long-distance connections between settlements that might otherwise never interact. Other valuable resources were also exchanged. These included flint, shells, plant materials, and crafted goods. Each region had its own strengths and resources, and trade allowed communities to share what they lacked. Merchants and travelers played an essential role in this system. They carried goods, information, and cultural practices between distant groups. Their journeys helped link early human societies into wider networks of interaction. As trade expanded, differences in wealth and status began to appear. Some households had greater access to rare or valuable materials. Others specialized in producing goods that were in high demand. These differences gradually influenced social relationships within communities. Early forms of economic systems began to take shape. While there was no formal currency, value was established through exchange, labor, and resource availability. Trust became essential for trade to function smoothly. At the same time, trade was not just about survival or material goods. It also helped spread ideas, beliefs, and technologies. New tools, farming methods, and cultural practices moved from one region to another through these networks. This increased the speed of innovation and connected human societies in new ways. But despite the growing importance of trade and work, life in the early city was not only about production and survival. There was another dimension to human experience that shaped everything: social life, belief systems, and cultural meaning. And that world was just as important as the economy itself. But life was not only about work and survival. As the first cities grew in size and complexity, human life became more than just survival. People were no longer only focused on food, shelter, and work. They also began to ask deeper questions about existence, meaning, and the unseen world. In early settlements like Catalhoyuk, evidence suggests that spiritual beliefs played an important role in daily life. These beliefs were not organized in the same way as modern religions, but they formed a powerful part of community identity. People likely viewed the world as filled with invisible forces, spirits connected to nature, animals, and ancestors. One of the most important aspects of these early beliefs was ancestor worship. The dead were not seen as completely gone. Instead, they were believed to remain connected to the living in some form. Ancestors may have been respected, remembered, and even symbolically present within the home. Many houses contain special areas that may have functioned as house shrines. These spaces could have been used for rituals, offerings, or symbolic practices connected to family history and spiritual life. Archaeological discoveries also reveal wall paintings in some ancient homes. These images often depicted animals, hunting scenes, or abstract symbols. They may have held spiritual meaning or told stories about the natural world and human survival. Religious symbols found at early sites suggest that people were trying to understand and represent forces beyond everyday life. These symbols may have been linked to fertility, protection, or seasonal cycles. Ritual ceremonies likely played an important role in bringing communities together. These events may have included shared meals, symbolic acts, or collective gatherings that reinforced social bonds. In a densely populated settlement, shared belief systems helped strengthen unity and cooperation. They provided meaning in a world that was still unpredictable and often harsh. Religion in this early form was closely tied to daily life. It was not separate from work, family, or survival. Instead, it was woven into everything people did. It helped explain the world. It helped reduce fear of the unknown. And it helped connect individuals to something larger than themselves. These shared beliefs also reinforced the structure of early communities, helping thousands of people live together in relatively stable societies. But life in the city was not only shaped by belief and ritual. It was also shaped by another powerful reality. In early urban settlements, death was not hidden or separated from daily life. Instead, it was closely connected to the homes and families where people lived. Burial practices in places like Catalhoyuk reveal a unique relationship between the living and the dead. Many individuals were buried beneath the floors of houses. This means that generations of families may have lived directly above their ancestors. The home was not only a place of life. It was also a place of memory. Ancestors beneath the home may have been seen as continuing members of the family. Their presence could have been spiritually important even after death. One of the most fascinating discoveries from these sites is the practice involving human skulls. Some skulls were carefully removed and modified, possibly painted or decorated. These remains may have been used in rituals or kept as symbolic objects. The exact meaning of this practice is still debated, but it clearly shows that the dead held deep significance in early society. Beliefs about the afterlife were likely complex and varied. People may have imagined different forms of existence after death, or believed that the spirit continued in some way within the community. Family connections across generations were extremely important. The living, the dead, and those yet to be born were all part of a continuous social and spiritual chain. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal how deeply intertwined life and death were in these early cities. Burials, artifacts, and household structures all provide clues about how ancient people understood mortality. But death was not only a spiritual concept. It was also a practical reality. In crowded settlements, managing health, disease, and mortality was a constant challenge. Life in the city had many advantages, but also new problems. Living in one of humanity's first cities brought many advantages. People had access to farming, trade, community support, and a more stable food supply than many hunter-gatherer groups had enjoyed. But urban life also created entirely new challenges. Problems that humans had rarely faced before began appearing as thousands of people lived closely together. One of the most obvious challenges was overcrowding. Catalhoyuk was densely packed with homes built directly beside one another. As the population grew, personal space became increasingly limited. Families lived in compact homes, and daily life unfolded in close proximity to neighbors. While this encouraged cooperation, it also created pressures that earlier generations had never experienced. Disease risks likely increased as well. When humans lived in small nomadic groups, illnesses often had difficulty spreading widely. In larger settlements, however, people came into contact with many more individuals. The close relationship between humans and domesticated animals may have increased opportunities for disease transmission. Although medical knowledge was limited, communities had to adapt to the realities of crowded living conditions. Waste management presented another challenge. Every day, households produced food scraps, animal waste, and other materials that needed to be handled. Without modern sanitation systems, keeping living areas clean required constant effort. The larger the settlement became, the more important cleanliness and organization became for community health. Fire was an ever-present danger. Most homes contained hearths used for cooking and heating. In a city where buildings were connected closely together, A single uncontrolled fire could threaten multiple households. Residents likely developed practices and routines to reduce this risk, understanding that fire could be both essential and destructive. Resource pressure also increased as populations expanded. More people required more food, more building materials, and more land for farming. Communities had to carefully manage available resources to ensure long-term survival. Periods of poor harvests or environmental stress could place enormous strain on the settlement. Social tensions may have emerged as well. Whenever large numbers of people live together, disagreements become inevitable. Conflicts over resources, responsibilities, or social status likely occurred from time to time. Maintaining harmony required cooperation, communication, and shared cultural values. Despite these difficulties, the people of Catalhoyuk demonstrated remarkable adaptability. They developed solutions, strengthened social bonds, and created systems that allowed thousands of individuals to coexist within a relatively stable community. These early urban residents were learning lessons that cities throughout history would continue to face: overcrowding, public health, resource management, social cooperation. Many of the challenges faced by modern cities have roots that stretch back thousands of years. The first city was not perfect, but it represented an extraordinary achievement in human organization. And despite its difficulties, the experiment succeeded. Cities continued to grow. People continued gathering together in larger and more complex communities. A new chapter in human history had begun. Despite the difficulties, cities continued to grow. The rise of the first cities marked one of the most important turning points in human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had lived primarily in small groups. Now, for the first time, large communities were learning how to organize life on an entirely new scale. This transformation is often called the urban revolution. It changed the direction of civilization forever. Cities created opportunities that had never existed before. Larger populations meant more workers, more ideas, and more cooperation. Knowledge could be shared more easily. Skills could become increasingly specialized. Innovation accelerated. The foundations of civilization were being built. In settlements like Catalhoyuk, people developed many of the social structures that would later appear in great civilizations across the world. Permanent housing, organized food production, trade networks, religious practices, specialized occupations, community planning. These elements formed the building blocks of future societies. As populations increased, social complexity also grew. Human relationships became more diverse and interconnected. People interacted not only with relatives but with hundreds or even thousands of neighbors. New forms of cooperation emerged. Communities became more organized and sophisticated. The influence of these early cities extended far beyond their own time. Future urban centers in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and many other regions would continue developing ideas first explored in these early settlements. While each civilization followed its own path, they all built upon the fundamental concept of people living together in permanent, organized communities. The legacy of the first city can still be seen today. Modern cities may contain millions of people rather than thousands. They may feature skyscrapers instead of mud brick homes. Yet many of the basic principles remain surprisingly familiar. People still depend on cooperation. They still exchange goods and services. They still create communities, traditions, and social networks. The lessons of the first urban communities remain relevant. They show the importance of adaptation, cooperation, and innovation. They remind us that civilization did not appear suddenly. It developed gradually through countless generations of experimentation and learning. The people of Çatalhöyük were pioneers. Without knowing it, they were helping create a model of human organization that would shape the future of our species. Their city represented more than a settlement. It represented a new direction for humanity. A direction that would eventually lead to kingdoms, empires, nations, and the vast urban world we know today. Yet despite decades of archaeological research, many questions remain unanswered. The first city still holds secrets waiting to be discovered. Yet many mysteries remain. More than 9,000 years after the first residents of Catalhoyuk walked across its rooftops, the settlement continues to reveal new secrets. Although archaeologists have spent decades studying the site, many questions remain unanswered. In fact, one of the most fascinating aspects of the first city is that researchers are still learning from it today. Every excavation uncovers new clues about how people lived, worked, worshipped, and survived during one of the most important periods in human history. The modern discovery of Catalhoyuk began in the 20th century. Located in central Turkey, The site appears from a distance as a large mound rising above the surrounding plain. For thousands of years, layers of homes were built on top of older structures. As generations rebuilt their houses again and again, the settlement slowly grew upward, creating the mound that archaeologists see today. Excavations have revealed thousands of buildings, countless artifacts, and an extraordinary amount of information about Neolithic life. Yet only a portion of the site has been fully explored. Much of the ancient city remains buried beneath the earth. This means future discoveries are almost certain. Modern archaeology has changed dramatically since the first excavations began. Earlier researchers relied mainly on physical digging and observation. Today, scientists use advanced technologies that allow them to examine ancient sites in far greater detail. Three-dimensional mapping helps create accurate digital models of buildings and neighborhoods. High-resolution photography captures details that might otherwise be missed. Computer analysis allows researchers to reconstruct structures and visualize how the settlement may have looked thousands of years ago. Ground-penetrating radar can sometimes identify buried features without extensive excavation. These technologies help protect fragile remains while providing new information about the ancient city. One of the most exciting developments in archaeology is the study of ancient DNA. Tiny genetic traces preserved in bones and teeth can reveal remarkable details about past populations. Scientists can learn about ancestry, family relationships, migration patterns, and even certain aspects of health. At Catalhoyuk, DNA research has helped researchers understand how individuals were related to one another and how populations changed over time. These discoveries sometimes challenge earlier assumptions. For example, people buried within the same house were not always closely related by blood. This suggests that social relationships may have been more complex than archaeologists once believed. Family, community, and identity may have operated differently than they do today. Researchers are also learning more about daily life through microscopic evidence. Tiny plant remains can reveal what people ate. Animal bones provide information about hunting, herding, and diet. Chemical analysis of human remains can even offer clues about nutrition and movement across landscapes. Every artifact contributes another piece to the puzzle. One of archaeology's greatest goals is reconstructing ordinary life. Kings and empires often dominate written history, but Catalhoyuk existed before written records. Because of this, archaeologists must piece together the story of everyday people. How did families organize their homes? What did children do during the day? How were meals prepared? How did neighbors interact? Each discovery brings researchers closer to answering these questions. Yet many mysteries remain. Archaeologists still debate why homes were built so closely together. They continue discussing the meaning of certain wall paintings and religious symbols. Questions remain about social organization, leadership, and decision-making within the community. Did certain individuals hold more authority than others? How were disputes resolved? How were resources distributed? The evidence does not always provide clear answers. Even the definition of Catalhoyuk itself remains a topic of discussion. Should it truly be called a city? Or was it something unique that existed between a village and an urban center? The answer depends partly on how historians define urban life. What is certain is that the settlement represented a remarkable experiment in large-scale human cooperation. Future discoveries may reshape our understanding once again. New technologies continue advancing every year. Methods that seem impossible today may become routine tomorrow. Researchers may eventually recover more detailed genetic information, identify previously hidden structures, or uncover entirely new evidence about social and religious life. Each generation of scientists brings fresh perspectives and new tools. As a result, the story of Catalhoyuk is constantly evolving. What we know today may only represent part of the picture. The first city still has stories left to tell. Beneath layers of earth and time, countless clues remain waiting to be discovered. And with every new finding, we gain a deeper understanding not only of Catalhoyuk but of ourselves. After all, these early urban pioneers helped create the foundations of the world we now inhabit. Their choices shaped the future of civilization. Their successes and challenges still echo through modern cities across the globe. The story of the first city is still being written. Our journey began in a world without cities. A world where small groups of hunter-gatherers moved across vast landscapes, following animals, gathering plants, and adapting to the rhythms of nature. For thousands of years, this was humanity's way of life. Then everything began to change. The discovery of agriculture allowed people to settle in one place. Villages grew larger. Communities became more complex. And eventually, settlements like Catalhoyuk emerged, representing one of humanity's earliest experiments in urban living. As we look back across the centuries, we can imagine the people who called this remarkable place home. Families gathered around warm hearth fires inside mud brick houses. Farmers worked fields of wheat and barley beyond the settlement. Craftsmen shaped tools, pottery, and textiles that supported everyday life. Traders carried valuable goods and ideas between distant communities. Each person played a role in the functioning of the city. Together they created something entirely new. The birth of urban civilization was not a single event. It was a gradual process built upon countless decisions made by ordinary people. People seeking stability. People seeking opportunity. People working together to solve the challenges of daily life. The first city changed humanity forever. It created new forms of cooperation, innovation, and social organization. It laid the foundations for future civilizations, from Mesopotamia and Egypt to the modern cities that now cover much of the planet. Today, billions of people live in urban environments. In many ways, our world is still shaped by experiments that began thousands of years ago in places like Catalhoyuk. The rooftops may have disappeared. The mud brick walls may have returned to the earth. But the idea of the city lives on. And as night settles over the ancient settlement once more, we can imagine the quiet glow of hearth fires, the distant voices of families, and the countless generations whose lives helped build the foundations of civilization. Their story is our story. And it reminds us that every great city, no matter how vast or modern, ultimately began with people learning how to live together.